This is the F-16C Block 50. This is the most modern F-16 that the US Air Force has ever bought, and now we have it in War Thunder. Honestly, that's kind of crazy to think about coming from the old top tier of F-86 versus MiG-15s, and here we have the most modern F-16 in the US Air Force arsenal on the game. Pretty crazy. Anyways, with the F-16C, there's a couple things that I want to cover. Really, I'm just going to try to run through all of the main talking points that I want to hit as fast as I can. We're going to start off with the loadout. You get 2 AIM-7Ms and 4 9Ms. That's probably going to be AIM-9Ms. That's going to be your standard option, though you can run whatever you want. If you want to run 6 AIM-9Ms, go right ahead. Or if you want to run 5 AIM-9Ms and 1 Sparrow, you could absolutely do that too. But I just run the classic 2 and 4. And, well, what's really changed about the AIM-7M? Nothing. It's still the AIM-7M. It's outclassed by the R-27ER, but it is, unfortunately, somehow the second best SAR missile that you can actually have at top tier, which is kind of funny, considering the R-27ER is just significantly better than it in every way. So basically, your loadout could be a lot worse, is what I'm trying to say. The 7M... yes, it is a lot worse than the ER, but it is better than pretty much everything else still, so that's kind of nice. And for the AIM-9Ms, you can think of them as pretty much just AIM-9Ls as far as their flight characteristics. They're going to perform exactly like an AIM-9L is, except the Seeker, of course, has some flare resistance to it. And it is not nearly as strong as it was on the dev server, thank God. But there are situations where the flare resistance is extremely obnoxious. These things in a side aspect shot are still damn near unflareable, and that's not very fun. We're going to see it right here on screen. Just pay attention to this shot. This F-16, he kind of turns himself side aspect here and starts flaring. He even cuts his afterburner, and it just doesn't matter. The 9M finds him anyways, and for whatever reason, the AIM-9M is very flare resistant from the side, but it is pretty easy to flare from the rear and the front. And if you need any extra help, I recommend doing a flare flower, as my buddy has coined the term, kind of. And that is basically where you just start flaring and spin while you're flaring, like roll the plane around and basically make a flower out of the flares. And that seems to do pretty well on these IRCCM missiles, or ECCM, whatever you call it, I don't know. The HMD is pretty nice. No other F-16 has it except the 2 new ones. The 2 new F-16s, you have the C in the US tree, and then the Barak 2 in the Israeli tree also has an HMD for the AIM-9Ms, but it really doesn't help the 9M that much. You're very rarely going to ever actually be able to make use of an HMD, at least in a traditional sense. You're not going to be getting close range, high aspect AIM-9M shots with an HMD because the missile is just simply not capable of pulling that kind of shot. However, it is still useful, and it is nice because you can just kind of point and click at any target you want within the same kind of vicinity, if that makes sense. So if I'm trying to shoot at 3 targets at once off of my nose, I can just queue up a missile, fire, queue up another missile, point, click, and so on. I don't have to actually steer the plane onto the target to launch the missile, and that does help, and it definitely adds a little bit, if nothing else, to the effectiveness of the plane. Honestly, the biggest upgrade of the F-16C over the A's, in my opinion, feel free to disagree here, is probably the countermeasures. We get a lot more countermeasures on the F-16C, and I think that is absolutely vital in current top tier 16 versus 16, because these new missiles, the R-73, the R-27ET, and the AIM-9M, they oftentimes require a lot of flares to actually counter and not die to. So you gotta press the flare key many times, and when you only have 15 total pops, as much of the old top tier 12.0 planes do, it's not gonna last you very long if you're getting shot at by 9Ms, R-73s, and 27ETs. So I think something like the Barak 2, I think something like the F-16C, carrying all these additional countermeasures is very nice and certainly welcome. I also want to make note of the radar. It does get an upgraded radar over the other F-16s. It is very similar to the F-16 MLU and the Chinese tech tree as far as radar goes. I'm not sure exactly what the technicalities of the radar specifications are, you know, what this band means and this frequency and all that. I really couldn't tell you. The gate widths, all I know is that from playing both of them, it's really not different. The missiles and the radars are going to be notched all of the same in pretty much the exact same shots and the exact same scenarios. So having an upgraded radar, you're not really going to notice an upgrade from even the previous F-16s, besides the fact that you get TWS. And TWS is somewhat useful, especially so if you're a sim player. but for us ARB players, it's not that helpful when all you have is aim 7Ms. I would like to draw attention to the screen here. If you want to rewind like 10 seconds, I just dropped half of my entire countermeasure load trying to chaff that incoming R27ER. But if I was in an older F16 that only had 30 countermeasures of each, and that's a total of 15 pops, I would be out of countermeasures right now, and that's just from trying to chaff a single 27ER. So to conclude that last little talking point, the radar, it is technically an upgrade over some of the other older F16s, but in practicality, are you going to notice the upgrade? Is it going to net you any more kills than it otherwise would? Nah, not really. And I did forget to mention real quick with the AIM-9M that it is a smokeless missile, so I guess that's kind of cool, and that's going to be especially helpful in sim battles where there's no markers and whatnot, but in ARB you still get a missile diamond when the AIM-9M is launched. So does the smokeless really make it any more effective or more difficult to spot? Not really, but I guess in theory it could make it ever so slightly more difficult to see coming and may net you a kill once every 100 shots or something like that. Point is, I don't find it to be a huge difference in ARB. Flight performance wise, it is an F-16, so it is going to be amongst the best dogfighting planes in the entire game, so that's pretty cool, but it is pretty much the worst F-16 flight performance wise. So against pretty much everything that isn't an F-16A or an F-16 ADF, you're going to absolutely walk them. But if you do manage to fight an F-16A or ADF, you are at a little bit of a disadvantage, and of course against the A you're at a significant disadvantage because that plane is absolutely cracked right now. It pulls like 16 Gs. Also, speaking of Gs, look on the screen right here. I'm sure a lot of you have probably noticed something in the patch notes somewhere along the lines of an AOA limiter or a G overload limiter being added to the F-16. Again, I don't know what Gaijin's cooking because there is no G limiter that makes it restricted to 11 Gs or any kind of AOA limit. You saw on screen I was literally just pulling 13 Gs there in the F-16C. So I don't know where they got the figure 11. There's 12 right there. I don't know. They say they made a G limiter. I disagree. There is no limit on this plane other than the restriction of the flight model, of course. The flight model can only take you so far. But again, the F-16A can pull like 16 Gs now. So whatever. If they say there's a limiter, I guess, but there really isn't. Something else worth mentioning is the F-16s now carry more fuel. So your fuel tank is now a 40-minute tank on full, on top of having the 10-minute external tank that you can carry. So you get a lot of gas, and you don't have to take that much obviously, but it is there if you need it. Keep in mind, of course, the plane performs better the lighter it is, and you can make it lighter by taking less fuel. So it is about finding some kind of happy medium there. As far as the S-16C compared to, say, the MiG-29 SMT, it's really up to preference. I prefer the MiG-29 SMT right now. If you were to ask me which one should I grind for, I think, honestly, to me, it's pretty clear that the 29 SMT, at least for ARB in a normal team environment, is probably going to be the more effective aircraft. You get a better radar, you get better weapons, you get the R-73, the 27ET, which just recently got a flare resistance buff, by the way, so it's like 20% more flare resistant than it already was, which is pretty incredible. And you get, of course, the best semi-active radar homing missile as well. So you get literally all the best missiles in the game in pretty much every category. And while no, it's not the best dogfighter, it's still pretty dang good, and it's still going to be wiping the floor with everything that's not an F-16 or an F-14. I do think that the R-73 is just better than the AIM-9M. Kinetically, they're very similar as far as range and speed and whatnot, but the R-73 just pulls way harder, it pulls sooner, and it accelerates faster. It just works better with the HMD, and while it may not be as flare resistant side aspect as the AIM-9M, it certainly is more flare resistant from the rear aspect than the front aspect too if you get close enough. And the cool thing about that is it is so maneuverable at close range that you can kind of just fly right up to people and shoot it, and they have no chance of flaring it because you're just too close. We'll touch on that more with the next video, which will be on the SMT, but this has been my coverage, I guess, of the F-16C. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you later.